So you want to live in New York City. Before you picture yourself grabbing coffee in Soho and taking the subway to a skyline view, let's talk about what that actually costs. Because New York isn't just expensive, it's expensive in a genuinely unique way that no other American city replicates. Let's break down the real numbers. Here's what gets people's attention first. New York is the only major city in the entire United States where you pay 3 separate layers of income tax on the exact same paycheck: federal tax, New York state tax, and New York City's own local income tax on top of that. State tax alone climbs as high as 10.90% at the top bracket, and the city adds its own bracket beyond that, meaning combined state and local taxes exceed 10% at higher earning levels, the steepest metro-level tax burden anywhere in the country. A single person earning $100,000 gross takes home somewhere around $65,000 to $68,000 after all 3 layers. A real, ongoing toll most other American cities simply don't charge. Compare that to a city like Miami or Houston, where state income tax doesn't exist at all, and the same $100,000 salary stretches meaningfully further before a single dollar gets spent on rent or groceries. That triple taxation is only the beginning. The median household income in New York City sits at roughly $80,000 a year. But multiple 2026 studies converge on a very different number for what it actually takes to live comfortably. Somewhere between $180,000 and $180,000 for a single person, depending on the borough and lifestyle. That means the typical New Yorker earns barely half of what the city itself requires for genuine comfort. A gap that doesn't exist at anywhere near this scale in most other American cities. Housing is where this gap becomes impossible to ignore. A 1-bedroom in Manhattan now averages somewhere between $3,500 and $4,500 a month. Following the standard rule of spending no more than 30% of income on rent, that alone requires a gross salary north of $160,000 just for a single apartment. And New York landlords enforce a rule almost nobody outside the city has heard of. You typically need to prove annual income equal to 40 times the monthly rent just to qualify for a lease without a guarantor. Want that $3,500 1-bedroom? You need to document $140,000 in verified annual income or bring someone who can co-sign. This single rule prices out a huge share of otherwise qualified renters before they ever see an apartment. Here's a cost that catches almost every newcomer off guard: broker fees. Unlike most American cities, a significant share of New York's rental market still runs through real estate brokers who charge a fee equal to 1 month's rent, or sometimes as much as 15% of the annual lease, paid entirely by the renter, not the landlord, even when the broker was technically representing the building owner. On a $3,500 apartment, that's an additional $3,500 to $6,300 due before you've even moved in, stacked on top of first month's rent and a security deposit. Some listings are marketed as no fee, but even those often bake the broker's commission into a slightly higher monthly rent instead of removing the cost entirely. New York State attempted to shift this burden toward landlords through the FAIR Act, but implementation and enforcement have been genuinely uneven, and many renters in 2026 still find themselves paying the broker fee regardless of what the law technically intends. Here's a cost almost nobody outside New York knows exists: congestion pricing. Since January 2025, driving into Manhattan below 60th Street during peak hours costs $9 per entry, dropping to $2.25 overnight, with peak hours running 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. on weekdays and 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on weekends. A federal court upheld the program in March 2026 after a legal challenge from the Trump administration, so it remains fully in effect, and the program has already raised nearly $550 million in revenue, funneled into subway signal upgrades and new transit equipment. But the sticker price is just the visible layer. Uber and Lyft riders pay a $1.50 surcharge per trip through the zone. Taxi riders pay 75 cents. Businesses receiving deliveries face surcharges of $1.50 to $6 per package from FedEx and UPS, which can add thousands of dollars a year to a midtown business's shipping costs, often buried invisibly inside routine invoices. A business receiving just 20 packages a week can face an extra $1,500 to $6,000 annually without anyone specifically noticing the line item. Law firms running daily courier trips have seen their annual costs climb by $15,000 to $25,000, prompting many to switch to batch deliveries and monthly retainers just to control the bleeding. This is the exact same psychological pattern we've covered in other Hidden May videos. Individually small charges, stacked so widely across an entire economy that almost nobody adds up the real total. Location changes the math dramatically, the same way it does in every city we've covered. Manhattan sits at the top of the cost pyramid, with rents and daily expenses that require the highest salaries on this list. Within Manhattan itself, neighborhoods vary enormously. The West Village and Soho command a premium for historic charm and low-rise character, while the financial district, despite housing Wall Street itself, often offers relatively better value in newer high-rise buildings built specifically for residential conversion. Brooklyn and Queens run meaningfully cheaper on average, though this masks real internal variation too. Williamsburg and Park Slope in Brooklyn now command rents that rival less fashionable parts of Manhattan, while neighborhoods like Bay Ridge or Sunnyside offer genuine savings with a longer but still manageable commute. A single person can live reasonably on $100,000 gross in the right outer borough neighborhood, taking home roughly $65,000 to $68,000 after New York's triple tax structure. Further out, in areas like the outer edges of the Bronx or Staten Island, costs drop further still, though commute times into Manhattan climb in exchange, sometimes stretching past an hour each way on a combination of buses, ferries, and subway transfers that residents in more central neighborhoods never have to think about. Everyday costs stack on top of housing in ways that surprise people who haven't lived here. A casual dinner for two with drinks runs $100 to $140. A three-course meal at a mid-range restaurant easily exceeds $200. Subway and bus fares rose to $3 in January 2026. A basic cocktail at a rooftop bar runs $20 to $24, and a Broadway orchestra seat starts around $180 and climbs from there. None of these individually breaks a budget. Stacked across a genuinely normal month of city living, they add up to a real second layer of cost, sitting on top of rent and taxes. Healthcare deserves its own honest look, because New York's costs here run meaningfully above the national average, and one cost index places healthcare as the single most elevated non-housing expense in the entire city. Employer-sponsored insurance is common for the professionals this city attracts, but even with coverage, specialist copays and out-of-pocket maximums in New York tend to run higher than equivalent plans in lower-cost states, since providers themselves charge more to offset their own sky-high rent and staffing costs. For anyone without employer coverage, marketplace plans in New York carry premiums that reflect the same underlying cost structure, driving up everything else in this video. You're not just paying more for your apartment, you're indirectly paying more for your doctor's overhead too. Here's what almost nobody puts in the relocation guides. Utilities in older buildings with steam heat are often included in rent, but newer condos with electric heat can run $150 to $250 a month in winter alone. And unlike most of the country, a car is often a financial liability rather than an asset here. Between congestion pricing, scarce and expensive parking, and insurance rates driven up by the city's density, many New Yorkers who could easily afford a car choose not to own one purely on the math. Renter's insurance, while optional almost everywhere else, is frequently required by New York landlords as a lease condition, adding another modest but real recurring cost most newcomers don't budget for. And moving itself carries a New York-specific tax. Many buildings require a move-in fee or refundable move-in deposit, sometimes several $100s, purely to reserve the elevator for a specific time window. A couple of quick myths worth busting. No, rent-stabilized apartments haven't disappeared, and roughly 1 million units across the city still fall under some form of rent regulation. But availability is scarce, competition is fierce, and most listings a new arrival finds will be market rate. And no, moving to Brooklyn or Queens doesn't automatically mean a dramatically cheaper life, the way people sometimes assume. The most desirable neighborhoods in both boroughs, like Williamsburg or Astoria, now command rents that rival or exceed less fashionable parts of Manhattan itself. One more myth. Buying is not automatically cheaper than renting long-term in New York, the way it often is elsewhere in the country, because co-op boards, the boards that approve buyers for the majority of Manhattan's older apartment buildings, can reject qualified buyers for reasons that would be illegal for a landlord to use when screening a renter, and monthly maintenance fees on co-ops and condos alike can run into the thousands of dollars on top of any mortgage payment. Now here's the part most cost-of-living content skips entirely. What does serious wealth actually look like in New York? Billionaires Row, the string of ultra-luxury towers along 57th Street, has redefined what expensive even means in American real estate, with individual units regularly selling for tens of millions of dollars and penthouse sales occasionally clearing 9 figures. Unlike Hawaii's Kukio or Panama's Costa del Este, New York's wealthy enclave isn't a lifestyle retreat. It's a status marker embedded inside the world's financial capital, which means proximity to Wall Street, top-tier legal and banking relationships, and unmatched access to global business are baked directly into the price in a way that beachfront property in other cities simply doesn't offer. Wealthy New Yorkers also navigate the city's steep transfer and mansion taxes on high-value property purchases, a real cost layer that only kicks in once a purchase price crosses specific thresholds, adding real friction even for buyers who can easily afford the sticker price itself. Private club memberships, from historic institutions to newer members-only spaces, add another 6-figure annual layer for those who want it. And New York's density of world-class private schools, at costs frequently exceeding $60,000 a year per child, means even wealthy families face a genuinely steep cost of raising children here that a comparable income in almost any other American city would never encounter at the same scale. Let's run the real math. A single professional earning $100,000 gross takes home roughly $65,000 to $68,000 after New York's triple taxation, leaving somewhere around $5,400 to $5,650 a month, enough for a comfortable life in Brooklyn or Queens with careful budgeting, but tight for a solo Manhattan apartment without roommates. Push that to $150,000 gross, and take-home climbs to roughly $95,000 to $100,000 a year, or about $7,900 to $8,300 a month. This is genuinely where the math starts working for a comfortable, no-compromise lifestyle in most of the city. And a household needing real family stability, with childcare and a larger home, is realistically looking at $300,000 or more in gross income to clear New York's version of comfortable, not exceptional. So does living in New York actually work economically? The honest answer is that it depends enormously on your income relative to the city's uniquely stacked costs: triple taxation, the highest rents in the country, broker fees that exist almost nowhere else, and a landlord qualification system that filters out anyone without documented income well above what they're actually spending. For a modest budget, the outer boroughs make the math survivable in a way Manhattan simply doesn't. For a genuinely comfortable life, the city demands a salary most of the country will never see.